Come join Melissa and her guests on the Chats from the Blog Cabin podcast. From North Carolina, this podcast will have you feeling like you've known these folks for years. Listen in as they chat about life, culture, current events, and more, all with a special Southern flair. Curl up with your favorite beverage and get ready to be entertained. Tune in now for a unique experience that's fun and insightful.
Hey y'all, welcome back to another episode of Chats from the Blog Cabin. You know, this show where I virtually invite people into the Blog Cabin to chat about life. And today, Sarah is joining me. And Sarah is a pioneer and a lot of things. I applauded you right before we came on. I applauded you about being a part of an interracial couple when basically it was not seen ever. So I applaud you for that. I applaud you for love winning out over everything. And Sarah, tell us a little about yourself.
So thank you very much for Melissa for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to be with you today. So
tell us a little about yourself.
You want me to tell you about myself?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, as you can see, if you're watching, I'm a woman of a certain age. I'm in my 80s right now, and this was my first published work, so this was quite an effort to write, but I really enjoyed it. And I've spent my life, I started life in England, as my accent still betrays me in that sense. I came to Ghana, spent a lot of time in Ghana working in a small university. That's where I met my husband. Things became quite difficult economically in Ghana in the late 70s. In 1980, we left for America, so I spent a lot of time in America. I had to change profession. I had been an academic, and now I couldn't get that type of work in. My husband stayed in academia, but I had to move into business, which was quite a change. But now in retirement, we come back to Ghana very often because that's, after all, my husband's home, and we like to be here, and we like the experiences we have here. And so that's the reason for my subtitle, Worlds Apart, a memoir of uncertain belonging, because I sort of belong and don't belong in 3 different continents, in 3 different places. And maybe, Melissa, I could, by way of sort of introducing myself in a way, I can read something from the introduction to my book. Is that okay?
Yes, go for it.
Okay. So I write at the beginning, my story starts with the sheltered world of my childhood. I grew up on a farm in Surrey, England. Social class and religion defined the world in which we lived. You know, social class was very important in England. Racial divisions didn't exist. We were simply unaware of different races. People of different skin color are seen in the pages of picture books or represented by gollywog dolls, some dolls we used to have in England, might as well have been gnomes or elms. We lived in an ancient Tudor farmhouse. The farm workers lived in cottages across the road from us, across the tracks, if you like. The boundaries seemed immutable. From the age of 7, I attended a convent boarding school. There, our sense of apartness, not to say superiority, was reinforced by the versions of history and geography we learned in the classroom. We had brief glimpses of other worlds, but these glimpses did little to affect my sense of who I was or where I belonged. My early identity has marked me indelibly, even though I have traveled far. My story ends, or nearly so, in Ghana. An image is woven into the patchwork of my life. We're sitting in the air-conditioned living room of our house in Accra. The curtains are drawn. CNN is blasting news into the room thanks to the satellite dish on our roof. The news connects us to the US, where we moved when we left Ghana in 1980. Dongo, our security man, lives with his family in the quarters behind our house. The wall that separates our lives from theirs is not dissimilar from the one that separated my family growing up from the workers on my father's farm all those years ago. Now, viewed through a wiser lens, I like to think that the boundaries are less rigid, more porous, places where lives are joined with empathy and understanding. They are boundaries nonetheless. No one has the capacity to live in an unboundaried world. The scale is too vast, our need for security too great. But we can live with more awareness of our blinders, and with compassion for those in other worlds. We can stretch the fissures in our own containers to learn what lies outside and rejoice at what we find. So that's how I introduce the transition, breaking out of the bubble of my childhood, which is a very narrow childhood.
Yeah, because obviously, yes, you did have a very narrow childhood, but once you started out in the world, you took so many great steps. You're a pioneer for women, a pioneer for interracial couples. I mean, literally, was there one thing that you're like, I shouldn't be doing this, but you did it anyways?
You know, not really, because it seemed like each step was a sort of fairly natural step. I guess the marriage to my husband was maybe the most deliberate and the one I had to think about most carefully, because I knew that wasn't going to be easy. And I knew my family weren't going to be happy, but I knew that there would be potentially a lot of tensions. And I think I really lucked out. My husband has turned out to be a wonderful person, and we've matured together. We've been together 53 years now, so that's pretty good.
Yes, congratulations, because most marriages don't last that long. So let's talk about that. Let's talk, because that's basically, I think, when the turning point of your life, when you got married or when you fell in love with your husband, because you decided to take a chance, because it was really unheard of back then. Nowadays, you see a lot of interracial couples, but back then you really didn't see a lot.
No, you didn't. You didn't see many at all. You saw a few, and every time we did see one, we sort of nudge each other and say, "Did you see? Did you see that couple? Did you see that couple?" And sort of wonder about their story and how they came together and what they'd faced. And I guess our first step in America was to come to Florida, where my husband had a Fulbright fellowship at the University of South Florida in Tampa. And of course, we were new to America. I mean, we knew of the racial problems in America, but we didn't quite know what to expect. And it was really remarkable how people looked at us and thought, wow. And then when we spoke and it was clear that we were foreigners, somehow we could be forgiven. Then, of course, we settled in Maryland, which was culturally very different and more accepting in a way, superficially at least, but we were still pretty much on our own as a mixed race, not entirely on our own, there were others. And we settled in Columbia, Maryland, which is sort of known to have been open to mixed race couples. That was one of the founder, Jim Rouse, was really wanted to insist on that, but nonetheless, there was a lot of stuff beneath the surface that, as we see emerging now in the discourse in America.
Yeah, for sure. Did you see a different? Excuse me, I got a tickle in my throat. Did you see different played out as far as when you lived in Ghana and when you lived in Europe?
Well, we didn't really spend much time in Europe as a mixed race couple. Yes, we were 2 years in graduate school, but then we were in a university environment, which was sort of different, and we didn't have children then. Other than that, we made a lot of visits to Europe because my family was still there, and my family eventually came to accept the situation and accept our children. But we never really lived as a family, interracial family. Now in Ghana, the situation is entirely different. We left when our children were still quite young, but there was some amount of prejudice against mixed race children, and we heard of that from other families. So it's, race is difficult. It's a difficult boundary to cross for everybody.
For sure. So what made you decide to write this book? Because every time I was like, man, this woman, she's like one thing, and then you created your own company because you didn't like the way you were treated in corporate America. And then you write this book to tell your whole life story.
Well, it was really, as I was sort of getting older, I was already retired, and I had these very vivid images of the almost idyllic childhood I'd had, even though it was very narrow. In rural England and the people and the villagers, and I just felt I wanted to capture some of that in writing. I feel if I could draw, I would be able to draw it. The people, the characters are so vivid to me even now. So that's where I started, and then I realized I wasn't very practiced in writing something. I'd done a lot of technical writing, but writing anything like this was quite different. So I got some lessons, I took some lessons, and I got some help along the way. And then gradually it sort of emerged that, yes, and it was at the time of COVID, so I spent a few hours a day. I tried to discipline myself a few hours a day, and it sort of somehow came together. And I had the benefit of a coach who was very helpful in getting me to stop reporting on your life. We need to know how you felt about it all. So he kept prompting me, and I feel quite good about the way it came out in the end. It was about a 4-year project. I didn't really know why I was writing it or who I was writing it for. I just tried to capture my experiences.
So once you got your book in your hand, who was your first reader? Was it your husband? Was it your kids?
Well, my husband had been read chapters all along, and my kids had had the chance to do that too. And I had a couple of readers of the whole thing in a first version and then in an edited version. One of them was an African American friend who I haven't known a whole length of time, but become a very good friend, and she understood the situation I was dealing with. And the other was a friend who I had known since the first day I stepped in Ghana. And she had also married a Ghanaian, and her marriage story had been very different from mine. They eventually separated. But she knew my history going back almost 50 years. So she was a good reader, and she was a scholar, a classical scholar. So she gave me a lot of help. So those were two people who really read the whole thing. And then I was very fortunate to have some readers who read the manuscript, who read it in a PDF version. who wrote reviews for me, and there I chose people who I thought would be very attuned with my spiritual message.
Your message is, when you first think about it, you look at it and you say, okay, you think you're going to be writing about relationship, but then you go off and talk about being a woman in a male-dominated workplace and how it made you feel, and how you had to branch out from that. So you created your own company, and you ended up selling your company to another woman, which I think is great. But let's talk about being a woman during that time in the workplace.
Well, it was a very, very hard time in my life, because I had been a senior lecturer, which is reasonably in the high academic hierarchy, reasonably well placed. I was sort of on track to be a professor at the university in Ghana. And then we left because of the economic condition in Ghana. My husband had a job, I didn't have a job, and I wasn't able to get anything in the university. So I had to move into business, and I had a background in both nuclear physics and curriculum. And it was a time when the nuclear industry, the commercial nuclear industry, was looking for people to improve their training. And so I got hired, but it was a technical world. Many of my colleagues were what we used to call Navy nukes. They had been on nuclear submarines. They were very, very intelligent, but not very educated in the liberal, more broadly. And boy, they gave me a very hard time. And I didn't understand them. They didn't understand me. But I soldiered on somehow, and in the end was successful, but it was a very, very difficult time. So really, I think that cultural divide between academia and business was almost as serious or as difficult as the cultural divide between Ghana, Africa, and the West, although very different. But it was a real cultural barrier I had to deal with there. And being a woman, I was the only educated woman. It was very, very difficult.
And being a woman in a male-dominated science field, my oldest daughter is getting her PhD in environmental toxicology.
Wow.
So being a woman in a science field is basically unheard of, because normally that's a male-dominated society.
Still, well, in the industry I worked with, which was, I just sort of fell into that. First of all, it was the nuclear power plants, but then it was the people who run the electric grid. There were no women around. In 1985, I think, I made a presentation to a group of managers in Charlotte. There were about 80 of them in the room. I was the only woman. And some of them were very gracious to me. I think they didn't understand what I was doing, but some of them were really toxic. They saw me coming, they walked the other way. They turned around and walked the other direction. So it was very tough. Now, in that particular industry, it's very different situation. So things have changed a lot. Yeah. I felt I had no option. I had to carry on. The family needed what I could earn.
That was next thing I was saying. What strategies did you use to not let the toxicness come into you, so that you get so down on yourself?
Yeah, well, I think I always knew I could do a good job. And so I think I really emphasized the quality of work, which of course didn't endear me to people whose standards were a little bit lower than mine. And so eventually I won the respect that I thought I was people. And then the other strategy I used very intentionally, because I was in instructional design, so you have to ask a lot of questions about the people, the experts, subject matter experts. So I deliberately positioned myself as the innocent outsider. And so by asking questions and making the person I was talking to, this was primarily our customers, they were the expert and I was this innocent person trying to figure out what they did. And they liked that. So the strategy of being the innocent outsider, even if I really knew that worked pretty well, worked for me quite well in facing with customers. Internally in the company, it was more difficult. And that's basically I left in the end because it wasn't working.
But you didn't let that keep you from going about and doing your own job and creating your own company, which is what I love. Most people, if they left a very toxic situation, would okay, I'm done with this field. I'm going to go do something else. But you created a company that you ended up selling it to another woman. But people were they want this company. They want you.
I think by the time I ended at my original company, General Physics Corporation, I had won quite a lot of respect out in the marketplace. So when I went on my own, there were quite a lot of people willing to follow me. And then I was very fortunate. I had a lot of luck because the need for training services in that industry grew tremendously after there was a blackout in 2003 on the West Coast. and they started putting in very strict regulations for the training of the operators. I developed a software and was able to track the development of the standards, and the software, that was a good stroke of luck, and I was able to grow from there. So when I left the company, about 100 major electric utilities were using our software across the country. So I felt very good about that.
Now, what kind of support did your husband give during this time? Because you've been together, you said 53 years. So obviously you had some ups and downs, but when you're going through this toxic stuff, was he like your sounding board? Was he like, okay, we need to do this, we need to do this? Or basically he just listened to what you said?
He listened. He would listen, and I dumped on him. But no, he didn't know anything about the business world. What I was facing as a woman, really. And he was very nervous when I decided to leave the company and found my own business, because he thought I was leaving a secure salary and goodness knows what was going to follow. And he had right to be nervous, but I think it was definitely the right decision I made then. I'm sort of very, very grateful I did, because it would have got more and more difficult. I was being sidelined. But he didn't really understand, but he was supportive without really knowing that. I mean, he was an academic. He'd never worked in the business field.
And might I add that you started your business and your office was in the basement of your house? I have to add
right.
that.
That's right. Well, that's the cheap way to do it. That's how a lot of people start, isn't it? In the garage or in the basement. And then, yeah. So that all worked out. I mean, I was very lucky. Things worked out very well. I had been very blessed by all the circumstances and what I was able to do. It was moving to America from Ghana was very, very tough for me, very tough. And for the children too, I don't think I really understood adequately what they were going through at school. I mean, I tried to understand, I sort of, in my heart, I didn't really see why should my children, my wonderful children, be treated badly? Why should anybody think they were less able than anybody else? And when the teacher called me and said, I just thought your son wasn't very intelligent, what? You really have a problem. He then went to Princeton, and he's now a senior executive with Boeing. He outpaced all of his classmates by a long way, but they thought he wasn't very intelligent. And it's that judgment based on race that people made, especially in those days.
I mean, that just breaks my heart to hearing you say that. But what do your kids think about this book and your husband? When you first got your book, first tell me what you thought when you first had your book in your hand, and then tell me what they thought about it after.
Well, it was very thrilling to finally see it in my hand. And it was my daughter, a friend of hers who was the design artist, actually he's from Peru, who did the design, and I was very pleased with that, because the publisher who I worked with, they could not produce a design. Their first cut was a picture of Big Ben, a picture of the Statue of Liberty, and a picture of an elephant. My three worlds. And it was so cliched and so awful. And they tried again, but they just, bless their heart, they just didn't get it. And then when my daughter's friend produced this cover design with the different cloths, and it was subtle, and it was I just loved it. I hold it up for your audience. And the two different cloths, one is sort of basically the same floral design, but one is clearly European, one is clearly African. Actually, this is the sample, the proofing edition that I have. And the flowers sort of peep into the middle, so they just intersect just that tiny little bit. And so every time I see this cover, I'm really, really happy with how that worked out. And yes, it was a very, very exciting moment. And, my children have really spread it among their friends, who have been quite appreciative. My son came home to visit a few months ago, and he bought a sort of stack of books that his colleagues had bought, and he wanted me to sign for them. That was very nice, yeah. And then my daughter took copies to a business meeting she was running and distributed them. Yeah, so I think that they have... I think they were nervous at first. I think they were very nervous. What was she saying? And my own siblings is sort of rather different. They are still rather conservative, and they haven't really responded very much to the book. So, but a lot of people have, people who've lived in cross-cultural environments or have seen some difficult times in life, they're very appreciative.
Yeah, this book is a really great book. I mean, I was sitting going, okay, what else can happen to her? What else can happen to her? What else can happen to her? But I love how you talk about once you guys decide to, you sold your company, and you told me today that you're in Ghana right now.
Yes. Yeah.
But also give back in ways of helping other entrepreneurs in Ghana. So let's talk about that.
And that's where I'd really like to read a few pieces, so I'm glad that's a wonderful segue. By a series of events, which I call an accident, an archbishop, and a visit. Anyway, we ended up, I really wanted to find a way to help, and we ended up working with the Catholic Archdiocese of Tamale to support young small business people with small loans. And the idea was we put in seed money and that money would rotate because as one person paid back. So it wouldn't be too onerous on us. And they were very happy to do that. So I had a few passages from that I wanted to read, if that's okay. And it's in Tamale, which is in the north of Ghana, which many Southerners don't really go to. It's a Muslim part of the country. It's sort of sub-Sahara, and it's sort of dry and much, much poorer than the southern part of the country. So I talk about our visits to Tamale and the interviews. So we returned to Tamale almost every year for many years. We interviewed numerous candidates and gave out more than 50 loans. The applicants represented human nature in all its variety: assertive and obsequious, honest, deceitful, serious, irresponsible, boastful, self-effacing. There were seamstresses and hairdressers and carpenters, poultry keepers and pig farmers, brewers and drug dispensers, printers and weavers, and inevitably some whose task was simply retailing in one of its many forms. I want to particularly talk about Millicent now. Millicent, a dressmaker, was one of the first to receive a loan. Tall and thin, with a dignified bearing, she is always impeccably dressed. When we interviewed her, she was working out of a simple wooden stall close to the archdiocesan office. The sign over the shop read, "The Lord is my shepherd," proclaiming her churchly allegiance. The priests passing by noticed how hard she worked and recommended her for a loan. And she got a loan to get an electric sewing machine and an embroidery machine, which she wanted. Despite many setbacks, Millicent has succeeded beyond expectation. Now, several years and 2 loans later, she has a secure workshop in the center of Tamale. A tailor and an embroiderer, as well as several apprentices, work there. We have witnessed her journey, both the ups and the downs, and rejoice in her success. When we visit, she tells us about her business and the current group of apprentices, but we know little of her personal life. We can only guess at the reason for the hint of sadness that often hovers behind her welcoming smile. And what I wanted to emphasize is, although we have this relationship, the barriers, the difficulty in communication remains. And then I go on to talk about several of the other people who got loans. And then I end that chapter with like this: an outing, an accident, and an archbishop. Those were the 3 things I talk about in the book, which came together for this loan scheme. This, who was the administrator of the loans, and a long line of small business people in northern Ghana. Our gratitude is deep and lasting. For brief moments, we have been able to touch lives and livelihoods quite different from our own, to admire the grit and grace of people who face challenges that far outstrip any we have experienced. No longer them, but thou. People we have known and cared about, embraced and exhorted, admired and admonished. Justine and Millicent, Rita and Angela, Philomena and Namuna, even the laggards, Herbert, Irene, and the hapless Theo, are woven into the fabric of our lives. We are grateful to have walked with them for a time, to have witnessed close up their struggles and successes, and failures too. They may live in a world very different from our own. The barriers to mutual understanding may be profound, but the place they hold in our affections can never be erased.
I love that.
So that's how I end that chapter.
So what made you decide to give back and give these loans out to help people, to give the people a hand up?
Well, I guess I've always had a sort of bit of a social conscience in a way, and that's what took me to Ghana in the first place. And, when I went to America and I had to struggle to make a living myself and got on the corporate ladder, it sort of, that side of my personality got suppressed, really. And as I was doing reasonably well in my own business, I just felt I have to find a way to share and give back. And I'm going to Ghana, and people say, are you going on a mission? What are you going to do to help? And really, I wasn't. I was just going to be with my husband and my family. And I thought, well, I need to do something. And so I was looking around, and this is what fell into place for us. And we just met Agnes the other day for lunch. She had come to Accra to get a visa to go to Germany. So, it's been a long-standing relationship now, and one that I value enormously.
What made you decide to do it as a loan program instead of just giving out money?
Well, I think it's that way, first of all, we could help many more people. And I think it's very important. I mean, having been in business myself, I think it's very important for business people to realize that, that they have to make money, they have to succeed, they have to learn, don't give a fish, teach people how to fish. And that was, I felt, had a multiplicative effect, which would be much more powerful than just giving out. I do a certain amount of giving out, but still, I think I still believe in it. Now, sometimes it was difficult for the people receiving the loans to see it that way, because they were sort of used to the church giving handouts, and that we were insisting that they pay back, because if they don't pay back, the next person won't get a loan. That was a difficult message for them. And so our scheme was not 100% successful in that sense. We had a lot of people who didn't pay back and who defaulted. So there was it was a struggle. We now have two slightly larger businesses that we're helping with slightly larger loans. One is in the shea butter production, and one is helping farmers through fertilizer and mechanized support. So I firmly believe that whatever money I might have to help needy people, this is a much more effective way, because you can leverage a small amount of money in a better way, insofar as we can do that.
I love the fact that once you get the loan, the money back from the loan, go ahead and reinvest it into another person instead of, well, that's our money, we're not going to do anything else. You reinvest it back into another person.
Right. That was the whole scheme. Once we put the money in, we didn't take any out. We just wanted to rotate. But unfortunately, inflation took a little bit of a bite out of it. But overall, even though we had all sorts of problems along the way, it has been a very, very rewarding experience. And just knowing those people and loving them as we do, it's a great richness in my life. I'm very grateful for all of that.
So how many businesses have you funded through these loans?
Well, I think overall I count about 50. And they're small, they're very small. It's just a hairdresser wants a hairdryer, or another one wants electricity brought to her premises so that she can use the electric hairdryer. Another one wants a simple sewing machine. These are not many of them. And we got to smaller and smaller loans because shorter payback periods seemed to be the best way. Another was an egg seller, and she was paying an exorbitant amount to get a loan, a credit to buy the eggs, so that she could, from another part of the country, so she could then sell them. The loan there was to get her a start, so she had paid a much less interest and could build her business that way. And then there was the lady who was making pito, which is a local brew. And the mush she had from the pito she used to feed some pigs, and the pig manure she used to cultivate a patch of corn. So she had a little eco business going. And then we would visit her, and the people would, old men who were just coming from a work day tired, and they would come for their drink of pito. It's a sort of light beer. And we got us insight into this life, which is so, so different from what we know in the West. And it's a boundary, because we can never really enter into their life. We can try and connect as best we can.
I love that, because a lot of people don't know what it's like to live in another country. Like, I had the eye-opener when I first went to Mexico with my husband, and he lived in a very rural area where they didn't have indoor plumbing. Like, when they would kill, their dinner would be out walking in the yard in the morning, and at night it's their dinner. So I wasn't used to that. So it's an eye-opener, but I definitely think that everybody should experience that so they can learn how other people live.
So it's so I'm here now. We had a patch of ill health, and it was about 6 months before while we were away. But we come back like a couple of times a year. I just love to be here. The people are so good to us. In our old age, we're fortunate enough. We have a driver, we have someone to help in the house, and I just warm to those people. Then I'm glad to come back to the US and get good medical care and all the rest of it. So we really live between three worlds, England thrown in from time to time. So I've really been very blessed to have such a rich life. The work life is far behind me now, but it's still there in my back.
So is there a period of adjustment when you're going, say, like from the US to Ghana, or from Ghana to England, or from England to the US, the adjustment periods?
There used to be, but now I seem to make that, culturally, I make that transition very easily. In terms of fatigue and hour change and so on, it sort of becomes more difficult as you get older. culturally, it's just like I put on a different pair of clothes, and I just, at first I did experience that quite a bit, but now not so much because I'm at home in both places really. But I belong, but as a white person in Ghana, you're different. When you're in a mixed race situation in America, you're different. And so we're always different. And that's the angst of belonging, but it's also the wake-up call, because the blinders have to come off. You don't have any option. So that's my very looking back, I was able to just sort of see my own blindness. I was able to see how my childhood assumptions were still with me, and I still had. And Clement, my husband, has often said, "You can't think like that. If you see, the foreigner comes here and takes pictures of people in sort of poor situation, how can you like that situation? That's awful. Those children should be in school. You shouldn't be amused by that or entertained by that. That's simply unhygienic the way they're going on. Don't So he's constantly bringing me back to reality in that way. And but yeah, it's a way to experience a different way of life and see a different way of life. Just this morning, I saw a security guard. I was sitting on the porch waiting for somebody to come back from doing something, and I saw a security man when the gate was open, went across the road and urinated. I have to find a way to get in. Look, you have a toilet. You don't need to urinate outside. Because that's just not hygienic and totally unnecessary. I don't know what he must have said, because it was clear that I was there sitting. So I'm going to not tell him myself. I'm going to find a third party. And as a third party, I can say, please tell Adongo he should not be urinating when he has a perfectly good toilet to use. But I'm sure he didn't give it a second thought. Why is she fussing? Would say, but I'm not going to be the one to deliver the message. I thought if I deliver the message, it's not going to be received
that well. Yeah.
Or received at all. Interesting.
So how are you able to make sure that each culture was observed with your children? Because obviously you're from England, your husband's from Ghana, your children are being raised in America, you have American culture. How are you making sure that their culture is still alive, your culture and your husband's culture, and they still raise? Well,
I mean, they're all in their 40s now, so all 50s, so the time has passed now. But I made a very big point of, as soon as we were able to save money and go to England every couple of years to see my family, and so that they would know my family. And I think they do. And in fact, one of our daughters decided to settle in London, so she's actually living in England right now. As far as the Ghanaian culture, I mean, obviously, my husband's friends and relatives came to visit. But because the economic condition was so bad in Ghana, we really couldn't go back to visit his mother, because it would have been a huge burden on her to arrive, and she can't find food to buy and so on. But we did go. We left in 1980. In 1994, we went and spent Christmas there, and we tried to. But I feel I could have done more in that respect. I feel that I almost took it for granted that I was going to bring them up the way I was brought up, and that the habits in the house were more British than Ghanaian. And I think my husband wanted it that way. I think he wanted it that way. He was sort of glad to escape from some of the more traditional practices. So looking back, I could have done more in that respect.
What made you decide to write the book? You already said your kids were like, okay, Mom, what's going to be in this book? What made you decide to actually put pen to paper to write it?
Well, I think it's, looking back, I see really it was a way of processing my life and trying to find the common threads and to reevaluate some of the things, like looking back, I could see how much of what we experienced, which at the time I experienced as being antagonistic or unkind or rude or cruel or racist. Looking back, it was all ignorance, it was ignorance. People are ignorant of other people, and that their behavior towards us was born of ignorance. But I wasn't big enough to be able to see that and to proceed and respond to them on that basis. And partly I ran away from it, partly I confronted them. I didn't do much confrontation because I knew I didn't really know how that would go in America. But absorbed it and, complained about it. But I think that processing one's life and being able to evaluate in terms of one's later experience is very valuable, and in terms of a broader understanding once the blinkers or blinders are off. Because people are ignorant. People are just ignorant of others. They don't know.
For sure. What made you decide to publish it though? Writing is one thing, but getting it published and actually seeing it.
When I was writing it and my coach was giving me feedback, and I almost didn't dare ask, is this publishable? And because he was a little crotchety sometimes, and sometimes he would be very, very affirmative, and sometimes he would say, "Oh, this is," and so I wasn't really sure where I was. And then as I got to the end, in the end, became much too long. I had to edit it down a lot, and then he became very affirmative and said, "No, this is very good. This is very good." But he said it's very difficult to go to commercial publishers and takes forever, and they don't accept and so on. So there are these independent publishers. So I found an independent hybrid publisher in the end. So yeah, and actually the way it came out, I was really very happy.
And I for one am glad that you wrote this book because it opened my eyes a lot. And I'm like, I applaud you for the way that you wrote the book and the way you shared your experiences, the negative and the positive. But even with the negative experience, you still found a way to overcome the negative. You're like, okay, well, this guy didn't want to listen to me in this meeting, but yet the very next meeting, he's mentioning something that you mentioned in the meeting before, that type of thing where the men wouldn't credit you for your ideas, but you still knew they were your ideas.
Right. And I don't think at the time I necessarily saw the positive side of those experiences, but in hindsight, I realized that how much I learned from how much.
So is there anything that you would say to, number one, a woman going into a male dominated business world, like a science or anything like that you would say to them today?
Well, as I said earlier, I played this innocent game that, please help me. I don't think women today do that. I think they're much more affirmative. They don't feel the need to do that. So I would say, be yourself, and there's no question you have to do a good job. Despite all the conversation going on right now, I think that, if you really do a good job, then it will be acknowledged. But you are going to, there's certain environments where you're going to be challenged as a woman, and it can be very hard. And I mean, you hear women who are firefighters and policemen and so on, and suffering a lot of pain at the hands of their male colleagues. And I never wanted to be just one of the boys. Some of the women, there's one other woman manager, there weren't many in the company, and her sort of stance was, let me be one of the boys. And I never thought that's what I wanted to be. I knew I missed out a lot by, not being there when they were drinking or going to the toilet. The men always turned to talk over the urinals and so on. But I knew I missed out a lot of that, and I think that I was a little stuffy. The stuff that they wouldn't share with me because I sort of distanced myself. My accent put me at a distance anyway. And I think you just have to be yourself, and then you have to decide whether that's really where you want to be and stick it out or not. I certainly don't advise to play along, because I think that's, foul language and all that stuff. I don't think we need to do that or should need to do that. But I think it's very difficult still in some professions. In the particular place where I worked, it's changed a whole lot since I was there. So I do think it's a lot easier for women nowadays than it was.
We still have ways to go, though, 100%.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And what would you say to a male or a woman that's in an interracial relationship, how to make it work?
Right. Well, I think one thing I could have done was to seek fellowship with other people in mixed race relationships. And there were others, and we somehow didn't find them. So I think that could be very helpful, because sharing experiences could be very helpful. I think, you have to be ready to adjust a lot. I don't agree with what you're saying here, but I'll go along with it, because you're my husband, or vice versa. Know where to draw boundaries and just be open. I've been in situations where there's a lot of funerals in particular. I'm the only white person there. There's all these relations. Basically, I'm just happy to be included, but I do feel a bit isolated. But I think I benefited from the fact that my husband was. I guess the fact that he married me, he was not 100% committed to traditional practices. And I think there's got to be a merging. And he was more inclined to be Anglophile and want to sort of say, why are you behaving why are you doing that? That's not the way you should behave as an English person. But he maybe went a little bit too far in that direction. So, just a little give and take. I think it's in any marriage.
Well, Sarah, our time is almost up. I really have enjoyed talking to you. Tell people where they can find you.
All right. Well, I did send you, I don't know whether you sent out a follow-up. I did send you you've given me my LinkedIn page, right? And my book is available on Amazon in softback and in Kindle version. This is what it looks like, except for that band here, which was saying this is not really selling. My complimentary, copy, my proofing copy, basically. That's the one I've been sort of doing all the markups and all the readings from. And yeah, do buy it and see. Let me know. Write a commentary on Amazon. Tell us how you like it, and that would be valuable, because I do feel that it deserves wider readership, and I'm not quite sure how to get there. So thank you very much for helping to spread the word. Yeah, Amazon and any royal in Ghana, where the facilities for the young we're working on the kindergarten primarily with a friend of mine here in our neighborhood, to really improve the facilities for the children, for the young children, and all my royalties are going directly to that school, to the projects there. Anything you if you buy it, your money is going to be put to good use, apart from getting a copy of the book.
Yeah, I'd love that. And actually, I am going to the daughter that I spoke about, because I have 3 girls, the one I spoke about, she loves to read biographies of women, strong women, and I'm actually going to buy her a copy and through Amazon and have it shipped through Amazon.
Wonderful.
And let her read it too as well.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you, Melissa. It's really been a pleasure to talk to you, and to know about your experience in Mexican American marriage, and I'm sure your community is going through a lot right now. We're shielded a little bit by distance from everything that's going on in the US, but it's very distressing. Everything that I stand for in terms of connecting across cultures is sort of being eviscerated. It's very sad.
Yep, it is very sad. 100%.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Hopefully people will rise up. So maybe can I read you just a little bit at the end?
You sure can.
Is there time for that? So what I say at the end is, although we have lived half a lifetime in the US, we remain something of a mystery. I think, mixed couples need to recognize that. We remain something of a mystery to many Americans. In Ghana, our very presence provokes questions, inviting connection of a sort, albeit one that often stories prevail. There are also threads of shared experience on which we can draw. Childhood home and the few times when family members visited Ghana. Finding ways to build bridges between my different worlds will always be a challenge. It may be a mistake to try too hard. Simple presence may be enough. I focus in the end a lot on presence. A presence in which my attention is focused not on cultural barriers, but on whatever moments of connection present themselves. Black on white, white on black, and bridge building remains a work in progress.
And bridge building is what the whole world needs, is a bridge building. Thank you for coming on. And guys, I will put in the show notes where you can find Sarah, as well as where you can grab Worlds Apart. I totally recommend this book. It's a really great read. If you're not one of these people that want to read, but you like to listen to books, there is an option, if you do have a Kindle, that you can actually listen to it through.
Well, the Kindle is there, and there's an audio version being produced, but it's taking an awful long time. A friend in Ghana is producing an audio version.
Okay. Well,
listen to Kindle. Okay.
So until next time, guys. And thank you once again, Sarah, for writing your book, for bringing your light into the world, and for sharing your story so that other women can learn from you as well.
Thank you, Melissa. I really appreciate it.
Okay. Until next time, guys. Bye.